12, my dad was a fisherman, and he said that I could swim almost before I could walk. And my dad taught me a lot about being hopeful and being optimistic and being positive, being resilient. And I owe a lot to him, certainly. And we moved to Leicester as a family when I was 12. Leicester City supporter, man and boy, don't mind owning up to that this evening. I spent half of my working life working in Africa, in working with children and young people, not just who are poor, but the poorest of the poor, and using sport and physical activity to promote human rights and well-being. And the other half of the time, I work at Loughborough University in London, mainly with young people trying to develop their leadership skills so that they can lead flourishing lives. And sport for development and sport for community strengthening is a big part of my life. Over to you, Sam.
Brilliant. Cheers, Tony. Well, as you can tell, Tony's the academic, and I'm the one who's kind of fuddled the way through and ended up being here somehow in the end. But yeah, so I've worked within disability sport since I was a volunteer at the age of 15, and my initial work around mental health and things like that was working for Derby County, running the mental health football programme there, which was one of the first in the country. And that was running activity to support people who'd experienced mental health issues or problems during their life. That also involved going into some of the most secure psychiatric units within Derby Hospital and private hospitals and things like that. So really experienced a lot of that within sport and physical activity. But then also, I think, like a lot of us, you know, as we'll probably chat through and share tonight, is that I think we all have some lived experience around mental health and well-being and things that happen within our lives as well. So there's a lot of that we can kind of bring into things. And you know, when we talk about seeking help and seeking advice and things, I was in that position at one point, sought that help, and then had very bad experience of that. So it's making sure that we have trusted people around us, those trusted ways of seeking advice and guidance and positive support, so that when someone does take that positive step to seek support or anything like that, that we can be the best that we can be to help them and to provide those positive environments as well. So tonight came about, as Abby shared, through the Melton Inclusive Sport and Physical Activity group, and then with this week being Mental Health Awareness Week. So we kind of wanted to do something to bring some awareness around this week and get the conversation started, but then also to have a bit of a chat through around mental health and well-being, but then also what are the kind of the practical things, the real life things that we can do to make a difference. And Tony will share, you know, a bit more stuff as we go on. But again, we haven't got a PowerPoint up on the screen tonight. Tony and I said that we're not doing death by PowerPoint, and we wanted tonight to be a conversation. So although everyone's on mute, at any point, if you want to ask a question, pop up, have a chat, share a personal experience, then please do that. Obviously, as Abby shared, you know, she's recording the webinar, so it's up to you whether you want to share, whether you're comfortable or not to share anything that either you've experienced or you've come across throughout your life. But I think what's going to make it best for everyone tonight is that sharing of personal things and you know, making it real rather than a list of points and things like that. So the first, you know, the kind of thing we wanted to kick off with was around kind of what is mental health. You know, I don't know if anyone's got any initial thoughts when we talk about mental health and well-being. Kind of, I don't know, what does it mean to you, or what are maybe some of the perceptions out there within society that are, you know, when we talk about mental health and well-being. So I don't know if anyone would like to share any thoughts.
I'm more than. Oh, go on. Someone beat me to it. Go on.
Sorry, yeah, we're both waiting for someone else to go first, then we're both on it at the same time.
Fill your boots, mate.
I was just going to say, mental health for me personally, I'm quite happy to share. I'm quite open. I won't overshare, I promise. I'm someone that's suffered with kind of anxiety and depression myself, and sport and physical activities really helped. I think what I think it's useful to be aware of is mental health is a lot of people will think about it and talk about it only when it comes to the point of almost being clinical. Someone's being diagnosed with a mental health challenge, and I think it's worth recognizing that all of us have a state of mental health, just in the same way that we have a state of physical health. And I think sometimes we don't necessarily, with the mental side of it, we don't necessarily take care of it until there's more of an issue. Whereas I think we're probably a bit more sort of proactive with our physical health, really. And we probably think about that a little bit more actively than we do with our mental health. So just in terms of what it is, that's what it means to me personally.
Cheers, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joe. That's really important to share. I think you've identified a couple of bits there. So one bit being that we only tend to think about mental health or account for it probably when it's not too late, but probably a lot later than what it should be. So we only pick up on it when it becomes an issue or a problem. That's why we refer to mental health issues or mental health problems. And like you say as well, it's trying to get mental health to be normalised, so we think about it and pay as much respect to it as we do to our physical health. So yeah, a couple of great points there. Thank you. Go on, Colby.
Cheers, thank you. Just following on from what you were saying, mate, about the physical aspect of your health, and I say this a lot to some of the volunteers we have. If you fall and scrape your knee and you cut your knee, you give it a wash, you look after it, and you go and get a bandage or a plaster. And if you leave it alone, it can get septic, it can get infected, and essentially bigger problems could happen. And that to me is mental health. If you treat it like your knee, let's say, you wouldn't leave it alone. You treat it and look after it just like your mental health. So, self-care is massive, just like you would take care of your knee if you were to graze it. That's probably the best analogy I use on a daily basis to explain it to people.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, isn't it? Because if someone breaks their arm, we don't do the same sort of thing as we do in sport, and I'll pick on the male side because that's what we say. We won't say, all right, get on with it, man up. You've broken your arm, get over it. But we tend to do that a lot around mental health, and I think that's similar there to the analogy you're using. And the other thing that you made me think about there, Cole, while you're going through that, was also the pre-injury side of things. I know that Tony will touch on this and elaborate more as we go on, but we try to prevent ourselves from getting physically injured by doing the right stretches, the right exercises, conditioning ourselves, physical training. But how much do we do that around our mental health? One of the things whenever I'm delivering coach education courses and things is, I'll pick on football because football's my area, and I know that football can be rubbish at it, is how many times do you see a football training session that is focused on the social or the psychological side of the game? And what I'm talking about there is about your confidence, your positivity, your communication skills and things like that. If I turned up to coach local football club tomorrow night and said, right, tonight we're going to work on, being more social, then I don't think that'd be seen as like a really, a high level training session. It'd be, oh, okay, that's a bit different. But, how many times do we actually have training sessions where we go, what we've got to focus on is the mental well-being or the mental strength or the resilience or confidence of people as well. So, yeah, no, thank you for that.
Okay, if I just say something.
Go on, Colin.
I was born with a physical disability, and I've had 39 surgeries since I was born. And it wasn't until 8 years ago when I had a breakdown that anybody discussed my mental well-being. I always felt a bit low, but it was never discussed, and I never thought about depression or anything because it was never brought up. So it's just, it's one of them things that gets passed over, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that, Colin. And again, I think, you've identified there about this kind of we pick it up when it becomes a problem. We pick it up, when it's probably we've reached a breaking point and things like that. And I shared about, my personal experience. Again, I got to the point where, like Colby shared about, seeing it almost like a physical injury. And I went to the doctor to seek some advice, and all said, "Oh, all right, okay, fill this questionnaire in, off you go." And I never went back, because that was the cold, hard response that I got when I went there. So then I didn't see any further support from anyone. But luckily I found my own ways of dealing with it and things like that. But that's where, thinking about it like our physical health and thinking about keeping it ticking over. And something, there's a couple of diagrams that I usually share within our presentations and stuff, but about our mental health, as we said about being like physical health, that it's a sliding scale. We tend to think of these extremes, or those with mental health issues, mental health problems or difficulties, and those of us are all okay. It's one or the other. But actually, well, I'm sat here with my coffee. Well, if I don't have my coffee in the morning, then my mental health is probably in a very negative place. Or if
I'll agree there, mate.
or if you're going for a job interview that day, then you might be in a very negative place and get yourself very worked up. But then as you get to that place for your job interview, and it might be, okay, this place isn't so scary. Oh, actually, the people here look quite normal and they're quite friendly and whatever. So then that anxiety and that stress goes down and you relax. So I'm not saying that you have, severe mental health issues or problems when you go for a job interview or whatever. I'm not, saying it's the same. What I'm trying to share is that it's this sliding scale that throughout a day or throughout a week or throughout our lifetime, we're constantly moving up and down this scale. So it's not a one or the other, but something that we've got to kind of monitor and keep ticking over. And the other part of that as well that we always talk about is, in our life, we tend to have stresses in our life, and then we also have our coping mechanisms. So stress, we always think about as a negative thing, or has always seemed to be a negative thing. But actually, for me, I need to have stress in my life, And when I say that, I'm talking about whether it's family, whether it's the job that stress, requires of you. So things that demand of you in your life are stresses. So they cause you to, have to have responsibilities and do things. I think we all need those things in our life to make us feel like we're important and that we matter and that we have a place in the world. But it's keeping that stress at a manageable level that is right for us. And then at the same time, we all have our coping mechanisms. When I talk about that, we talk about, it might be that glass of red wine or a pint in the evening to, get rid of a bad day and chill out. It might be sticking the football on at the weekend, or it might be going out for a run or whatever it may be. But doing those things that help you just to maybe switch off, relax, forget about some of those stresses. But again, those coping mechanisms, we need to, keep at a right level, keep in balance with our stresses, because coping mechanisms can very easily then become a problem in our life. And examples of that is physical training. If someone is going to the gym,
Sam,
doing that,
so sorry to interrupt and do this, but I've got a response here in Newark that I've got to attend to. I'm going to have to jump off, guys. All right.
Yeah, no problem. Well, if you're
Apologies.
available in a bit, then jump back if you can.
100%, mate. I'll probably message Abby and let her know. Okay. Thanks so much.
Cheers, Colby. All right. Bye. Yeah. So just to share around those coping mechanisms can become a problem. So if there's someone who's going to the gym, but if that becomes too much and you go in multiple times a day and end up getting injured because you're doing too much of that, then that coping mechanism can become a problem. Saying if that one glass of red wine in the evening becomes a bottle and becomes a few bottles, then that coping mechanism again becomes a problem. So sharing here is that you've got these stresses and these coping mechanisms, and the thing about maintaining a good balance and positive mental health is by keeping those things in balance that keep us ticking over on a daily basis. If we start to lose track and let one become too much, then that goes out of balance, and then it's when it becomes something that we find very difficult to manage, very difficult to deal with, and then becomes maybe taking over our life and we don't have that control over it. So there were just a couple of little bits I wanted to share. Tony, I don't know if you want to add anything around any of that. No, you're on mute, Tony.
The sunshine. Hello, everybody. Yeah. One thing I didn't say when you asked me very kindly to introduce myself, I didn't say that I was a psychologist, and maybe it's time to declare that kind of hand. I'm a positive psychologist, which basically means that I'm really interested in what people can do rather than what they can't do, and what we want more in our lives rather than what we want to fix and get rid of in our lives. So from that perspective, I wonder if I can just make three points on the basis of what I've heard so far. The first thing is it's about language. And one of the things I've learned through many people presenting with different kinds of mental health issues is that when people talk about mental health, it's very important to be precise about what that word mental health really means. So for example, there are many kinds of health. We've talked about physical health and mental health. And we know that, you know, one of the things about lockdown, where we've become, you know, relatively less active, gyms are being closed, and perhaps we've been walking or whatever, is that when we're in poor physical health, it affects our mental health. We feel more sluggish, we feel not really strong and vibrant and healthy and full of vitality and so on. So we talk about physical health and mental health, but there are other kinds of health which affect you know, our daily living. One of those things we've touched on, that's social health. And that is, you know, through a pandemic with social distancing, physical distancing, this, you know, this social health has been very important for some people. So for example, a lot of people are presenting feeling lonely. A lot of people are feeling, because they can't go to church or join in their community facilities, that, you know, they feel disconnected from others and their friends. All the stuff on the radio today about, have you got your hug list ready for, you know, for next week? You know, people you haven't hugged for months and months, sometimes a year. So there's something called social health that I suggest we need to think about, because social health actually affects our mental health, just as physical health affects our mental health. There are two other things too, which sometimes go under the radar. One is our emotional health, because how we feel affects how we think. Some people think mental health is just about, you know, how we think about ourselves, how we think about others. But behind the thinking bit is the feeling bit. So how we feel affects how we think affects what we can do. So our emotional strength, our emotional health, you know, is something that perhaps is in the mix when some people talk generally about mental health. It's in there as well. And the other thing I would just suggest, which is often not spoken about, but for some people is really powerful, and that's our spiritual health. That is for people what gives our life meaning and purpose. So if we're not great on our spiritual health, in other words, our life, maybe due to some kind of trauma or loss or whatever it is, if we lose that meaning and purpose in our life, it affects how we feel, therefore our emotional health, and it affects how we think, and therefore our mental health. And when our emotional health is low and our mental health is low, it's likely that we don't pay attention to our physical health. So it all kind of interacts and goes in a kind of mix. So all I would say is that sometimes when people say mental health, there's lots and lots of bits in that sometimes we need to just kind of explore to see what kind of aspect of mental health, you know, really is the trigger for, you know, what people are saying or, you know, or thinking or doing at that particular time. So that's one thing, just very quickly. Two other points are this. Colin said something which I really appreciated. You know, why is it that, you know, Colin used the phrase passed over? And I think one of the things is that some people find it really difficult to talk about mental health issues. You know, we don't have the language, the issue's a bit tricky, they're a bit slippery, we feel not quite competent or capable to talk about this. Sometimes people try and give advice. So it's all a bit dodgy and a bit difficult sometimes to talk about mental health. Particularly, I think, certainly Colin and I was interpreting, you know, going to, a national health practitioner of one kind or another, like your GP, really poorly or ill-equipped to actually talk about mental health issues. So I think one of the things about being passed over or passed around is the fact that, generally speaking, people are more comfortable talking about physical illness rather than mental illness. It's a tricky, difficult area, and a lot of people aren't suitably trained in that, except the mental health first aider course, which is what you touched on before, which is, you know, as my colleague said to me recently, when a client comes into my office, it's often too late. And so unless we're actually going upstream and actually trying to strengthen people before the inevitable issues or problems arise in life, then maybe all we are is just fixing problems. And that would be a great shame. So I would say something about, you know, language. I would say something about, you know, feeling confident to handle mental health issues. And if we can't handle it, who would we refer somebody on to? You know, who would we, if we don't feel able to talk about it, who could we suggest that somebody goes to talk about it? Those are some of the things that, you know, just come into my mind from what I've heard so far. Does any of that make sense? Anybody want to come back on that one? Was that a load of gobbledygook?
And I think what you have gone.
Sorry, can I just say something? And I think it's really good what you said there, because we are holistic beings and we need to look at ourselves holistically, because everything impacts on everything, doesn't it? So if you don't do your physical, it brings you down, it affects your emotions, it affects your thoughts. So it's all that. But I've worked and in many different ways. I've been involved in mental health for a long time. I'm not saying how old I am. And one of the things is about language. And I spent a long time trying to promote from mental illness to mental health, because I think one of the problems why it's a tricky subject is because, unfortunately, we still haven't got rid of that little bit of stigma that goes around. So what's really good is to hear about wellness, well-being, that positive side, because what it means is that, so an example would be, you can go to the doctors and say, I've broken my leg, and somebody will say, how many weeks are you going to have your plaster on? When will you get better? You can go to the doctors and you can say, I'm feeling depressed. And it's kind of like they'll give you some treatment, but they don't talk about recovery. And recovery is really important, that positivity. And so talking about a mental health issue or a mental health problem kind of gives you the idea that you can overcome it. And I think that's what's really important, what we should promote, because back in the day, it was like, that was it. And nobody would get any help. Sorry, I'm waffling, I'll shut up.
No, I think that's really great, Vicky. Thank you for saying that. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think when you said very graciously, you said there's a little bit of stigma. Well, I think it depends who you talk to and where you work. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of stigma around mental health. And I found that particularly in sport, how difficult it is, even though a lot of quite high celebrity sports women and men are now coming out talking about different aspects of mental health. I think it still has that stigma attached to it, which is you're kind of, it's a problem, you're unwell, it's a bit of a mystery, you can't necessarily treat it with a pill, you don't know how long it's going to take, and all that kind of stuff that we've touched on. So I completely agree with you on two counts. One is you've got to approach this holistically. I think that's really, really important. And the second thing is that the more we can do to put all our energy and effort into prevention rather than cure. In other words, working upstream rather than downstream. In other words, strengthening people, making them hopeful, making them optimistic, helping them to be resilient, knowing what their strengths are, knowing how to play to their strengths, so that when they get a tough issue in their lives, they've got more social and psychological and emotional resources inside them in order to help them cope with that. I don't think we're investing enough upstream. We're still actually at the point of, so this problem is, this person is talking about a problem they've got. No matter how serious or how mild, it's still framed as a problem. And the more we focus on the problem, the bigger the problem gets, in my opinion. What do you think, Vicky?
I've got to unmute myself quickly. No, I think, yes, about positivity. One of the things I work with asset-based and social prescribing models. That's all about people, what people can do. And it's not that, what, you know, it's like, what skills has the community got? What can the community help people with? And it takes that edge away. And I know when I said a little bit of stigma, I was kind of being polite, because there is a lot of stigma. And I looked into it. I delivered many years ago. I delivered some awareness training, and I looked into the history of mental health, and it's pretty horrific and it's pretty amazing. And the thing is that I was still working with people who have been in that system and have had that kind of treatment. So I think it's going to be a while to get rid of all that. But anything, the more positivity that we can put in, the more about what we can do, the better we'll build our resilience. That's it. So yeah, fully agree.
Just reminded me of something there, I think, when talking about being in the system and stuff like that. An example from something I used to deliver. So when I used to deliver some training in Derby, we used to share that within some of the mental health units, still in Derbyshire, and I'm sure it's the same all over the country, there are women within some of those units who were sectioned many years ago because actually they had a child outside of marriage. So because of what were the rules and the things at the time, and the implications, these women entered into the mental health system, but then become socialized within that system, or don't have that support and recovery, so that then actually being within that system is the only place they are, and they stayed then, because there wasn't this focus on, right, okay, this is an issue, and maybe, you know, maybe they experienced something severe at the time, but then what is that recovery journey? How do we then help back from that you know, thing that's happened? How do we get them back to a place? And the other thing I was just going to share as well was, I think that thing about supporting people. So far we've talked about our own mental health and looking after ourselves, or building resilience for ourselves, but then also when we're likening a bit to first aid and stuff like that, you know, what responsibility we take in for others as well. You know, the role that we play. We're social beings. We're there, you know, to live in groups, to live in communities, to have responsibility for one another. And I think there's two parts to it. There's building ourselves to be as supportive as we can be for others within our life. But then there's also the side of it where that's a huge task for somebody, you know, to be that support and to understand sometimes. And I remember delivering a workshop in Leicestershire, where we had a lady who shared on this workshop that she found, or, you know, came to terms with the fact that she was going through a very severe period of mental ill health. And she went to her husband to share this, to seek the support. And her husband was actually one of the people in her life with the biggest stigma. You know, she'd gone to this person in her life who she thought was her rock, her support system, who, you know, we'd all say we'd all be there for our partner. But then when it came to it, that kind of stigma and the understanding of that situation made it very difficult. So I'm not saying that from a negative on him, but how much are we aware, and how much, you know, do we understand the role of supporting others, and are we, you know, developing ourselves in order to do that as well? So building our awareness around mental health, but then also building those skills around how we support others and how we're there for them as well.
I find
sorry.
I find that people will talk openly with me about my physical disability, but as soon as I mention depression and suicide, they sort of become very uncomfortable and change subject very quickly. And then they'll talk to my partner about me because they don't want to upset me, sort of thing. And that's where I was so pleased with getting involved with Disability Bowls England, because everybody understands each other there and you can talk openly because each of us has been through and understands. So that's it.
I think that's very important, Colin, and thank you for saying that. I mean, I think it is really important for two reasons. First of all, I think there's this element of how do you understand somebody else's situation, feelings, or condition? Well, one of the ways is that if you've been through it yourself and you're in some better place or in recovery or able to speak about it, then that gives you, you know, a kind of empathy with that person. You can kind of give yourself a bit of a start in trying to understand and appreciate what that person is going through. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing, Colin, is that it's, you know, talking about mental health is actually a really skilled, you know, skilled business. I mean, you mentioned, you know, the S word there, suicide. Well, people who have those kinds of tendencies or self-harming tendencies, or even just acute depression, you know, it's really difficult, even for close friends, to find the right words at the right time and so on. So I think one is, you know, having lived through a bit of it gives you that kind of empathy. And the other thing is that finding, you know, when Sam says seeking support and whatever, I'm right behind that. It's finding the right kinds of people who don't try and want to fix you or make things better or give you advice, even though that may be really, you know, coming from a very good place. It's sometimes just listening to somebody and being there for somebody and being at the end of a phone or an email or whatever. But it is highly skilled business. And, you know, there's this thing about people trying to meddle in mental health. They meddle in it. In other words, you know, we think we can probably cure it or deal with it or whatever. When, as you said, Colin, you know, it can go back a long way. It can be very complicated, and it can be very deep and very emotional and serious business. So I always say to people, you know, err on the side of caution. If you want to find somebody to speak with, then, you know, just try and put that message out and see who bubbles up, and then pick and choose as carefully as you can. And it seems like, you know, being part of a bowls club seems to be absolutely perfect. That you've got people there that, you know you as who you are, Colin the man, and therefore, you know, through sport, through bowls, there's a kind of way into it gradually that can be explored, and you're not going into somebody's room and you've got 10 minutes or 20 minutes, get it off your chest, Colin, and then get on with life, mate. You know, it's really careful stuff, I think, is what I'm saying. What do you think, Colin, about what I've just said?
Yes, yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. I find that when I first joined Melton Indoor Bowls Club, I didn't really tell anybody about my disabilities or my mental health. I wanted them to get to know me as me before I explained everything. So like, I didn't want sympathy, or because I hate people when they feeling sorry for me. Yeah. So I try and let people know me before I open up to people. And then I just sort of, I pick and choose who I know will understand. And then, because some of them, when I won one of my international competitions with disability bowls, I heard them say, "Oh, isn't it good that he can win things with his own kind?" So it sort of puts you a step back from people, you know?
Yeah, I get that totally, Colin, absolutely totally. And I wonder if you'll allow me just to make one other point. Sam mentioned this at the beginning. I happen to be directing a global project at the moment called You Matter. It's about you matter. Colin, you matter. You know, Sam, you matter. Joe, you matter. You know, Claire, you matter. It's about mattering. And I think what we're finding in this project is that one of the things that helps us get through each day, maybe helps us through difficulty, is this feeling that we matter. We matter to something, or we matter to somebody. And when we feel we don't matter, we feel lonely, or we feel left out, or we feel stigmatized or misunderstood. These are really horrible, horrible feelings. And so what we're finding, Colin, is that when you said it's great, like talking to people of your own kind, what I hear when you say that is something really helpful for everybody. It's about, if it's people of your own kind, it means you've got maybe a common language, a shared interest, and that, you know, you matter to each other. Playing bowls, you matter to each other. And that, you know, that teamness that comes from that, it matters. So I think, you know, if we strip it all back, what I would encourage everybody to do on a daily basis is try and reflect on the question, what did you do today to make somebody feel that they matter? Because we know that's at the core of well-being. That helps protect people, that helps strengthen people, that helps make people feel good. So it's this thing about feeling you matter rather than feeling you don't matter. Because when you don't matter, that is a slippery slope down to mental illness. But when you do matter, when you feel appreciated and valued and liked and welcomed, you know, that is so much more kind of strengthening and uplifting. So I say that to people. What did you do practically today to try and make somebody feel they matter? And I wonder if there's anybody on this call that would like to answer that question.
I give my brother a ring every day, just to say hello, and just to make sure he's okay, because he lives on his own.
Yeah, and that's great, Colin. And you know, I wish more people would be open and say that, because it's these things which seem quite small are really hugely significant to us all. You know, one call a day, just being in touch, just saying hello. You don't have to speak about anything too much, but he knows you're there and so on. I think that's fantastic. What other things do you do, people on this call, to, you know, like today, did you make anybody feel they matter? Because that's at the core of being well. At the core of being mentally ill is people feel they don't matter, they're not worthy, they're not who they used to be, they can't do what they used to do. You know, it's all that can't and whatever. Joe, did you do anything today to try and help somebody feel they matter? This is not a catch question, Joe. This is, you know, when I ask people this question, people say, actually, consciously, I don't think I did today. Well, that's great, because maybe what we can do is that, you know, every day or every other day, have that conscious thing about, I'm going to say something or do something today for that group, that individual, you know, that player, whatever it is, to deliberately say, I notice you, you know, you're on my radar, you're important, you're appreciated, you're loved, you're cared for, and therefore you say something that's going to make them feel they matter. And if you did that regularly, my gosh, that doesn't uplift people. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I think funnily enough, I've actually got a call booked in with my sister after this call's finished, because I've asked her to make I'm getting married later this year, so I've asked her to make my wedding ring, because she used to be a jeweler, and she recommended that I go to her friend, and I wanted her to do it because I thought she would want to as much as I wanted one from her. I think in terms of making people matter, I think probably if I go back a few steps, I'll probably give a long-winded answer to your question there. But one of the things that you said a minute ago that really resonated with me is that when you're talking to people about your mental health, it sometimes is a case of picking the right audience. So if I go back to when I first decided to speak to friends about my own mental health, my own challenges. I remember the first person I spoke to quickly changed the subject. The second person I spoke to, response was something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, I know how you feel because I've got this issue, which is X, Y, and Z," and they went into their own sort of issues and their own challenges. And it sort of initially, I thought, well, that sort of put me off speaking about it now, because actually people either don't want to talk about it or they just want to reflect on their own experiences. And I have found over time that actually I have found the right audiences when I've asked the right people, and not to be put off and sidetracked by a bad experience at the beginning. Probably goes back to what Sam said about going to a GP and get given a questionnaire. It may be that you've not spoken to the right person, or that somebody else might give you a different answer, and not to be put off. And one of the things that, this is my long-winded answer to your question, one of the things that I did last year is I started to see a lot of posts and comments on social media around mental health. People are talking about it more, but I was personally feeling a little bit frustrated in that I didn't feel that people were talking about it in the right way. I'd noticed that some of the people that I'd spoken to and had avoided the conversation were kind of copy and pasting these generic statuses around, if you like this post, it means you support me, etc. So I did make a conscious point last year to do a charity challenge where I sort of ran 5K every day. But the point of it was that whilst I was running, which was incredibly difficult, I would have a conversation with someone that I'd not spoken to for a while and ask them how they were doing, and have a real kind of genuine conversation, not quite a shallow conversation. I think that was quite good. I've tried to make a bit more of a conscious effort to do that a bit more often. I try and do it without running at the same time now, because I find that helps with my fitness levels. I can't really run and talk at the same time. But that's something I've tried to just do on a few times a week, make a point to think, who haven't I spoken to for a while, and let's have a check-in, not just for the sake of it, because I've realized I actually want to try and keep in touch with people a little bit more. And it makes you feel better if you feel like you're helping other people feel like they matter, like you were saying just then. Sorry, that was a really long answer to that quite simple question.
But that's the thing, though, I think, Joe, which makes this webinar so important. I think, it's a massively complicated topic, but I think we can do some small practical things that make a big difference. As you were just saying, just like asking somebody from time to time, not how are you, but how are you today? Not how are you in general in life, but how are you today? How are you feeling today? Or, as you say, just actually doing something that you think will help people feel they matter. I think one of the things that I find in my own work is that, goes back to what you said and what Sam said earlier, is that people only open up and talk about how they truly feel if they feel safe with you, if they respect you, if they feel safe with you. Because I could actually tell you a lot about, my dreams to play alongside Gary Lineker. But, and that's quite safe for me, really. But if I talked about how I truly kind of think and feel, I have to trust you with my feelings, and I have to know what you're going to do with what I tell you. So I think there's this thing about feeling safe and feeling trusted, a trusted person, but also this thing about feeling connected with that person in some way. And that could be through sport, through meeting a local community centre or church, or the shops or whatever it is. It's this feeling that you're connected might actually then be the basis for an opportunity to talk to people about how you truly feel, rather than going around the houses and ending up not saying what you're really feeling. It's this finding a trusted person and feeling safe with them, safe in what you say, particularly if what you're saying is quite deep and quite personal stuff. Then, whoa, would I trust Sam with my feelings? Well, I'll trust Sam with my daily diary. Would I trust him with my feelings? Well, yeah, it would, as it happens, because Sam and I go back a way. But some people I wouldn't trust with my feelings, but I trust them with everyday information. So if we talk about mental ill health rather than mental wellness, it's finding somebody I think we can trust with our feelings. That might be one of the key things.
It's something I was thinking about throughout a lot of the things that people have said, and this is either going to be really embarrassing or it's going to resonate with a lot of people, but who opens up to their hairdresser? Hairdressers have this amazing way of getting like everything out of you that you don't tell anyone else. But I've found myself, when I've finished having my hair cut, that I've like opened up more than I do to my family, my partner and whatever. And when you watch films and stuff, it's usually like the bartender or someone like that, isn't it? But the thing that I see that flows throughout all these types of individuals is what Tony mentioned earlier, is that listening, that not the, just the, how was your day, casual, I'll listen to what you say, but actually really listening, spending that time, taking account of what you've said and things like that. And I think that's really important, having that real connection, like Tony said, about really feeling that you matter, that you've got that person's time and attention, where actually it's focused on you and you are central to that. And I think then that's why all of this conversation links so well within sport and physical activity when things are set up in the right way. And I think Colin's example of the bowls club, where he's got that experience, again, sport is that nice environment that relaxes people and takes it away from being this probably a hard, cold conversation around, how are you, or, what's wrong or whatever. But actually through sport, if it is, being at the running club and you're running alongside someone and you can be quite easily chatting because it's in a different environment and it's away from things. But sport has this wonderful way of actually just taking some of that away and making those conversations a lot easier.
If we take hairdressing into a sporting context, Sam, just for a moment, if we can, the question arises in my little mind, which is, why are many hairdressers so skillful at what you've just said? And I think there's a real parallel with sport here, because I think hairdressers do two things really, really well. That's why people actually say going to the hairdresser is not just getting the hair done, but it's therapeutic. So they come out feeling great. I think one thing that hairdressers really do that people in sport can do really well, particularly coaches, is that hairdressers create a context or an environment which is really lovely. You go to you're at the hairdresser because you want to come out looking better, feeling better, with more self-confidence and whatever. And I think we do that in sport too. Great coaches, in my opinion, create an environment or a context in which people can have fun and enjoy themselves. And it's a great place to go, just like going to the hairdresser is a great place to go for most people. So that's one thing I think we could learn from your hairdressing experience. The other one is, and I'm going to generalize, but I think a lot of very skillful hairdressers or stylists, I think they're called, or whatever they're called these days. I mean, I think they're really non-judgmental. You say things and they're really they just kind of listen, and they don't jump to a judgment about, oh, that's good, that's bad, or you're right, you're wrong. They just kind of listen and listen openly, and they're very non-judgmental. And therefore, I think the more non-judgmental people are, the more likely it is to open ourselves up to them. Because if we say something to somebody and we know they're going to jump down our throat with, oh, that's silly, oh, that's stupid, or why on earth did you do that? That was a bit foolish, then we're less likely to open up. We're less likely to say things. And I always find really great coaches are very encouraging and very non-judgmental. They want individual players, for example, just to thrive and flourish. And they want to create an environment in which they can be the best they can be. So maybe your hairdressing example is a really good one to think through.
I was going to say lockdown hairdressing from my other half didn't open up lots of long conversations and things like that. But I think
that's because you took too much anxiety into the chair. You see, she or he was never going to win that one. Don't touch that. No. I do need 2 hours. Leave that ear on. Leave it on.
What you were saying there, like linking, I think I picked up from what you were saying there, Tony, about the coming out feeling physically better about yourself. It shows this tie between mental health and physical health, that if we are at a running club and whatever, by feeling physically better because we've released that adrenaline and the endorphins, and we've exercised, so we feel better about our body, naturally we feel better about our mind as well. And same the hairdressers, if we feel like we come out looking better and feeling refreshed and better, then again it knocks onto our mental health. So again, they top one another up, and there's that cycle. So that's why sport has this really powerful impact on us, because it does release the chemicals within our body that impact upon our brain and our brain function, our mental health. But then at the same time, we know that by topping up one, we generally help with the other.
Yeah, but when we leave the hairdresser, sorry to stay on this, Abby, when we leave the hairdresser and we feel good, if we strip that back, that means we feel more self-confident. We feel like we're okay to go out in the world. We're all right to be seen by our friends. We have a bit more self-belief. It's all those really powerful things that make us feel stronger because we've had a very positive experience. I think the danger of being preoccupied with mental ill health is that it has this effect on some people to actually, be more draining rather than strengthening. Yeah, because the more we talk about a problem, often the bigger the problem gets. That's what we know. So anytime we have conversations around, these issues we've talked about, the more we can actually leave people in a good place, the more likely they are, one, to recover, and two, to perhaps come back and want to have another chat with us, because they think, it's actually quite nice talking to Joe, because, he didn't belittle me, he didn't embarrass me, he didn't make me feel silly. I thought that was really nice. So I'm much more likely to go back to Joe and maybe tell him a little bit more. So it's this thing about how can we have conversations that really matter with people, that leaves them in a better place than when they started. And that, I think, is really skillful. It takes a lot of our own character and personality, but also a lot of our skill set as well, to be able to help people to build a better sense of who am I now, what can I do, who do I want to be going forward, and all those kinds of identity things that sometimes get a bit of a bashing when we lose that self-confidence and self-belief and self-esteem. What do you think, Margaret?
Sorry, I was trying to get the thing to unmute, it wouldn't work. Yeah, I agree. Thinking about your creating the environment that I'm working in, which coincidentally is the same as you, Tony. I also work at the University of Loughborough. We have practitioners that create an environment of trust. And I think it's that element of trust sometimes that people need to develop. And I've heard lots of them say that they're taken into people's confidence at the lowest point in their physical activity, because obviously they're trying the rehabilitation because of a physical injury, possibly in physiotherapy, perhaps clinic or something like that, and they're taken then into the confidence of the person about at their lowest ebb, when that mental well-being is also massively important to that returning to physicality and top fitness.
Yeah, we talk a lot about safe spaces, don't we, Margaret, and how important that is. What we're also learning in sport, and particularly from high-profile elite sportswomen and sportsmen that are now talking about issues of mental illness, is that we also have to create another kind of space, which is not a safe space, but a brave space. In other words, a space or a place where people feel like brave enough to put it out there, brave enough to actually say it, knowing, Margaret, that they won't be humiliated, knowing that they won't be deselected, knowing that their teammates won't frown upon them, and then they'll be kind of marginalized, even very subtly, like the people that used to talk to you don't talk to you much anymore, because, and it's because sometimes there's that fear factor, isn't it? Oh, she or he's got a bit of a problem, and therefore it makes me feel a bit nervous about talking with them. So it's this thing about creating a brave space where people can really say what they truly think or feel without recrimination, without damage. I think that's a big responsibility, I would suggest, for all of us, to create both a safe and a brave space. Because safe spaces, I've found, particularly in sport, Margaret, is that sometimes safe spaces, we can hide in safe spaces. I don't know if you found that. It's so safe that nobody ever says anything really of any consequence. It's just, we don't want to upset people, want to keep the boat on an even keel. So you don't really, it's a bit like the elephant in the room. Now, like I said to you, my dad was a fisherman, and my dad had this wonderful phrase. He said, Tony, we've got to put the fish on the table. And that basically means you've got to get it out there at some point. Without feeling, you're going to get absolutely slammed and hammered for it. So yeah, safe spaces, I think, up to a point, but brave spaces as well, where you can actually really say how you truly are feeling and thinking without any fear of people making you feel all the things you want to get away from, feeling silly, feeling stupid, feeling like you should be getting on with life, feeling like, oh, you're playing the role of victim and all that kind of stuff. What do you think, Margaret?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, Tony. Yeah, it is that element of taking that first step and being brave, isn't it? Knowing that you're not going to be judged.
Yeah, yeah.
Really interesting. I was just thinking about, I've got a little 7-year-old boy, and when he's been at school or in other environments, if he does anything wrong, then he'd be scared to say anything. Whereas what I work with him a lot on is if he's made a mistake or he's done something wrong, then talk to me about it, and we'll celebrate that. We'll chat about it. If he knows he did the wrong thing or whatever, then the fact that he opens up and he talks to me about it, I thank him for that. I'm appreciative of that he's opened up and he talked to me. And if it's something wrong, then it's something that we can learn from, we can develop, we can do something. But in a lot of life environments, we have this, like we've been talking about, this fear factor of I'm not going to disclose that, or I'm not going to share it, I'm not going to say I did something wrong or whatever, because I know there'll be a backlash. And we almost have this then built into us that we're then so scared to open up or share anything, because we're almost anticipating what will come. And that's why I keep it in mind for my relationship with my little boy, is him having that confidence that he can always come to me no matter what it is in his life, whether it's the biggest mistake in the world or whatever it may be. For whatever the biggest mistake is for a 7-year-old, it's probably I don't know, deleting an iPad app or something, or whatever it may be, whatever the latest thing is. But again, if we can create those safe environments, but those environments where we can openly share that, then we build those trusting and positive relationships, like Tony said earlier.
I think if you look at some of the latest reports coming out, Sam, as I'm sure you're aware of, like from the Children's Society and so on and so forth, the reported incidence of mental ill health is now becoming at an earlier and earlier age. It's now no longer a teen problem. It's actually young people from the age of 7 upwards actually showing signs of distress and anxiety and depression and going into themselves and not actually being the kind of people they want to be and whatever. So this issue is now going down the food chain, which I think is really serious. And one of the things I would encourage everybody is that when you said earlier, Sam, about early childhood experiences are really important. Now you're talking about your lad as well, is that, you know, I think this is about positive parenting, but I think it's also about positive coaching as well, which is we have to balance up, I would suggest, not just talking about what's wrong, you know, what went wrong, in other words, fixing what's wrong, but actually have conversations about building what's strong. In other words, not just talking about what was wrong today, but what was right today. What didn't you do today, but talking about what you did do today. You know, actually just flipping it over and talking about the positives, just balancing it up a little bit. Because I think, you know, from a very early age, you know, young people are starting to experience things like failure and disappointment and feelings like, am I good enough? Can I do this? Am I worthy? You know, and all that kind of those difficult, debilitating beliefs that over time mount up, which then when they get to your teenage, you think, that all kind of starts to come together with all sorts of maturational things and hormonal stuff. And then all of a sudden, a young woman or a young man then actually starts to have challenges in life that they've been perhaps ill-equipped and ill-prepared for. I'll give you a little example from my own experience. I had the most idyllic childhood. My father was a fisherman, as I've said, and I was born 50 meters from the sea. And between 0 and 12, that's at 12, I moved to Leicester, and this is not a cheap shot at Leicester. I had some great times at Leicester. When I moved from 0 to 12, I had the most idyllic childhood, absolutely fantastic childhood. I got to the age of 5, and I had never, ever experienced anything to do with failure in my life. I went to first day in primary school, I ran away at break time. Those were times when you get in and out of primary schools without gates and, you know, and fencing. I ran home at break time. My mother actually took me straight back into the classroom. I hated my first week or two at school. I'd never experienced all those negative things. I cried and I was very unhappy until my teacher appreciated my dad was a fisherman, and she put me in charge of the goldfish in the tank in the classroom. Now, I carry that experience with me when I work with coaches and I coach myself. It's, can you find that little something through knowing that person well and intimately that you know will trigger that person's positivity? Yeah. As soon as I was in charge of the goldfish bowls, my whole attitude to school changed, because had my teacher / you know, modern day coach not really started to understand me, she might never have given me that job to do, and I would never have fallen in love with school. And I think that's I think there's some parallels, like your hairdressing thing, Sam. I think there's some parallels there between good teachers who really know their kids and good coaches who really know their players. And then we're able to create an environment where at least they have the opportunity to thrive and flourish.
I think that brings us on like nicely, thinking about within the group and everyone who's here this evening, in terms of the sport and physical activity environments, either that you experience yourself as a participant, or maybe you are involved in delivering or leading or whatever it may be. I think it'd be interesting to hear, you know, what are your experiences? What is maybe something that you remember that made a certain coach or a certain club or a sport really click for you? You know, what are the ways that we do some of those things that Tony's been talking about to make sure that we create that connection with our participants and get the best from them? You know, I always share that with coaches that you can be the best coach in the world, you can have all the technical expertise and know everything, but the reason that person will keep coming back is because of you as an individual, your personality, the connection that you have, not because you're the next, you know, Alex Ferguson or Arsene Wenger or whatever it may be, but it's the personality of you as an individual that will keep them coming back and keep them hooked on the club. But yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to share anything. What's been a moment or an experience that's clicked for you?
Well, when I was younger, I was totally switched off from sport. When I was sort of told that at school they had to adapt the games for me to fit in, and it'd be better if I just sat and watched, because then they could do it properly. So I thought, well, I shan't bother with sport. And it wasn't until I was 2010 when I saw them playing bowls and they had an open day, and I thought, well, they're old people, so I might be able to fit in there. And I went and had a go, and I found I was pretty good. So, and everybody's equal on that green. Doesn't matter whether you're old, young, disabled, able-bodied. Everybody's equal, and it's the best thing I've ever done. And then when I got involved with Disability Bowls England, I'm now ambassador. But unfortunately, when I became ambassador, everything shut down, so I haven't actually done anything yet. But I'm really looking forward to that sort of pushing my joy to somebody else. So yeah, that's.
Thank you, Colin. Really, I really appreciate what you said then. When I heard you say that, one of the words that was in my mind was the people that you were playing bowls with were very accepting. You know, that's part of being non-judgmental, you know, very accepting. Tell me if I've got this right or wrong, but it sounded like they accepted you, you know, they accepted what you could do, and they accepted who you were. And because they were very accepting and very open, they were very welcoming. So you felt that you could be who you wanted to be because they were very accepting. Is that anywhere close to being true?
Yeah, definitely, yes. It's how you bowled more than the way you bowled, sort of thing, because I know I have to use a chair and special things for balance, but none of that mattered. It was all about just bowling the bowl and joining in with the team. And then when I went to Melton indoor, we just went for roll-ups and things, and I never told anybody about how I felt or anything. But the best thing was being asked to join a league team, because they thought it's not because I was disabled, but because I was a good bowler. So that made me feel 10 foot tall, because I was being picked for a bowler and not being disabled.
I think that resonates for me, because my day-to-day work is within disability sport. One of the biggest things that we always talk about is seeing someone's abilities rather than their disabilities, but also seeing the person that's in front of you and being recognised as a person. I think that's the thing that resonates for me from you, Colin, and also when we're talking about mental health, is not seeing the issues or the problems or the challenges, but seeing the person in front of you who you can connect with, have a conversation with, who you can, you know, not about curing anything or whatever, but actually doing what is normal. You know, I always say that we live in a world where we're meant to be more connected than ever, but actually a lot of the time we're more disconnected than ever, because we have a social media, we have all these different digital ways of sending our messages and getting in touch, but actually how much do we spend time having those real connections and real conversations as well?
I think that's a big... Sorry, Colin, go on.
I think the worst thing for a disabled person to feel is being a burden to anybody. And so if you can make people feel normal while they're playing, and that they're part of the team, and that they're a big part of the team, then that's the best feeling in the world.
I think that's a really great point, Colin. And, you know, this thing about feeling that you're a burden, of course, you know, there's a parallel conversation to be had here, which is how people feel they are a burden as they get older. There are a lot of ageist people around who, you know, once you get to a certain age, all of a sudden they feel they're a burden because the society actually treats them differently. As soon as they, you know, have a certain pair of numbers against their name, all of a sudden, you know, people begin to treat you differently. But yesterday you were exactly the same person. So this thing about educating, I think, everybody to appreciate, you know, the character and the qualities of the person first, and then the sports person second. And I think sometimes coaches, particularly if I may say working with young players, sometimes get that the other way around. They're actually doing the technical and the tactical and all of that stuff. And they forget that these are young girls and young men, and it's the same, I think, throughout perhaps all ages. It's person first, sports person second. Get to know the person first and what they bring, and respect them and appreciate them. And then, okay, or what? We play bowls together as well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Michael, did you want to come in earlier? Saw you unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yeah, just to make a quick point. I remember, I mean, this will probably make Sharon's ears burn a little bit, but I remember going to ASME Amateurs Ladies and Girls Awards Night a few years back. And what struck me, it was so different to any events I'd been to which basically involved boys or men, in that they were very much focused on the characters of the girls and how they were developing as people, rather than who scored the most goals or who made the most saves. And they really had a sort of holistic approach to things, which I have to say was great and quite surprising and eye-opening. Just the whole way their award ceremony ran was along those lines. So they were looking at the character of the people. It's Tony's point about the person first, and the young sportswoman second. Just something else Tony mentioned earlier about how sort of mental health issues we see them rising at much earlier age. Well, there is a link really to physical activity, because we need to get children doing sport or physical activity as early as possible, and to try and get those habits well formed. And that really does help when they get to teenage years, you know, when other issues come up, say with girls, it might be to do body image or whatever. So just getting those habits in early, because participation drops off, you know, from about age 7, you know, especially with girls, and there's a divide there between girls and boys actually doing sport. That does have implications, you know, as we get older. But yeah, just hats off to ASME Amateurs for, you know, for the ladies and girls football club there, for how they obviously approach things, and that sort of holistic approach. And I think the men had a lot, and the boys teams probably have a lot to learn from that.
Shall I add something on to what Michael very kindly said about our football club? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
You do generally at a lot of boys football clubs get teams, or many managers and coaches will actually say, well, let's have a look at them. That is always the first thing they'll say. And we have a philosophy at the girls football club, is everybody gets to play regardless of their ability. And I think football in general is the perfect place to get children in a safe environment, but you do predominantly see in the boys, it's very, very competitive. I'm not saying the girls are not competitive, but I do feel that the women and girls play football generally for quite different reasons. We have a philosophy about pushing and encouraging the women and girls to actually take part in the coaching and the managing, because if you look at a lot of sports clubs generally, it's a very male dominated volunteer section. And I think for us as a club, it's important that there is role models for girls and boys, not just kind of the guys are the role models. And I think I've found really there is now only 1 or 2 football clubs that have the aggressive male attitude towards football, and predominantly they are a concern for us as a club, but I think that's decreasing. But I think having experienced different issues on the mental health side personally and within the football club, I think it's important that you do have that philosophy that everybody gets an opportunity to play the sport, because there's a big forum and an opportunity for there to communicate with kind of people that are coaches and managers and generally have had a little bit of training, as opposed to sometimes some sports there isn't a lot of information out there. Whereas as football, we are quite well informed. I wouldn't say we're perfect, but I do think there's a lot of information out there for us as a football club where we can learn things from other groups.
I think something you shared there the other day, and if anyone sees it come up, I did this webinar on adverse childhood experiences a few days ago, which was really, really powerful and really interesting. It was saying about how, you know, some children can maybe go through very, you know, traumatizing experiences at a young age, but actually the thing that can help them to recover and get back to a positive place and, you know, get back to a better place for the rest of their life is by having a strong, well, a positive, trusted adult within their life. And what this kind of brought home and resonated to me is the power of sport, that all of you as coaches, activity leaders or whatever, I don't think we ever really take account of the part that you play within people's lives, especially young people's lives. You know, when I used to work for Derby County, and there was some of those sessions, and I saw the relationship between some of our coaches and the kids. Well, that football coach, and like Sharon was showing, you know, your female coaches being a strong role model to those young female players, again, is such a powerful part in that young person's life that will help shape them, help them feel that they're important, that they matter, and give them, you know, someone to look up to. And you know, we may not ever really know the, you know, the different situation of all the people that we're coaching and we're working with and stuff like that. But by being a positive, consistent and trusted person within the lives of all those people, you know, whether they're young people, older people, whoever they may be, but that is the real power that sport can play by shutting off the world and all the stresses and all the rubbish that's happened during the day. But when I'm in that sporting environment, I'm relaxed, and that person there is someone that I'm rushing to get to see, because I love going to the running club, or I love being within my football session with that group of people who make me feel, you know, really positive and really good about myself.
I think there's a big issue here, Sam, about, you know, about how we, you know, effectively manage people who are having some kind of difficulty, mental health difficulty or otherwise. It's going back to young people playing sport. And as I think, as long as coaches and others emphasize things like be competitive, emphasize winning, emphasize, you know, the technical and the tactical, emphasize, you know, being strong and running fast, all those things, I think it's not putting the person first, as I think we've discussed it. Because if coaches were putting the person first, I think we'd have perhaps better people and less mental health issues as people get older. For example, how could football build trust? Because if we don't trust ourselves, how can we trust others? How can football help people understand a sense of fairness, playing fair? Because if we don't know what being fair means, how can we, when we get to 14, 24, 64, whatever, if we haven't had that experience of fairness early on in our lives, how are we going to understand it in others? About what can football do with teaching honesty? What can football do with helping people to be openness? What can football do with helping people be empathetic and understand what others are feeling? What can football do to help people be compassionate? That means, not being too hard on yourself, not being down on others. I think all those things I've just touched on there, if we can't see them in ourselves, if we haven't got them within ourselves, I think then, we put ourselves at a disadvantage later on. And through football, if more coaching were to emphasize things like self-compassion, don't be too hard on yourself when you lose. It's just a game. Put things in perspective. Maybe when people grow older, they're able to be more compassionate to others. And I think this is one of the elements about helping people to maintain wellness, is that they mix with people who are very compassionate, very empathetic, are very trusting, can be open and honest, understand what being fair means. So I think there's a lot of stuff we can do to go back to where we started this conversation, which was, if we can actually focus more upstream on the prevention, on strengthening people first, at whatever age, it may well be that when life does throw us a curveball and things do get difficult, we've got those strengths, those resources within us. We've got those relationships. We've got that self-knowing, that self-knowledge, which will at least give us a chance to, cope with whatever, difficulty life throws at us. We're stronger. We're at our best when we're strongest, mentally, physically, and otherwise. So can we use football to build up those strengths, not just physical ones, but all those other strengths that will actually, we can put in our backpack and carry those through life, and they're going to help us when life gets tough for us.
Just to bring this, we're at closing time now, so I'll hand back to Abby in a sec to finish off. One of the things I think is good is to bring this back to the MISPA, the Melton Inclusive Sport and Physical Activity group, is sharing those positive experiences, sharing those good practices and things that, successes, or, like what Michael shared about, as for the amateurs, well, can we share that within the community? As look at what as the amateurs do here and the impact that it has, can we share those type of things? And that's why we created the MISPA group, and there's also the forum on Facebook, so that we can connect clubs, share the positive things that people are doing, so that we can all grow and develop together and create more positive and better experiences. So that's where kind of Abby and the team are there to, provide any support. So if there's any questions or challenges, things like that, then, there's support available to chat through, and advice and guidance to any clubs and stuff like that. But then also what we want to do more of is, like we've chatted about tonight, celebrating what we're doing well, and then sharing that with others as well. So if there's, I know I posed that question earlier, but if there are things, the positive experience that you've had, or the positive thing that your club or another club does do, then let's get that out there so we can see more of that and see that more consistent positive approach to sport. I think, like Sharon was saying, the good work going off within some of the football clubs, let's keep up that good fight, keep things moving in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Tony. And also everyone for kind of inputting and sharing their experiences tonight. I think there's been kind of a lot, well, it's been very insightful for myself, and there's lots of things I've definitely taken away, and even some of the comments like from Joe around kind of touching base with people, and things like that. It's just, yeah, lots of things that we can take away and use in kind of daily life, but also in kind of your own kind of sports clubs and organisations and things like that. So yeah, I think you'll all join me in thanking kind of Tony and Sam for hosting this conversation. I think it's been really refreshing. Actually kind of not sitting in front of a PowerPoint or a presentation and just having this chat, and hearing people's experiences, because I know there's definitely things that have resonated with myself, and I'm hoping everyone else has kind of got that, and taken things from this. So as I say, yeah, a big thank you to you guys and for everyone kind of for their input. As I will do kind of a follow-up from the webinar anyway. It has been recorded and I will stop that now.